This lesson is from the course, The Centrality of Eternal Sonship, in the introductions of Romans and Hebrews, taught by Dr. Lane Tipton.
Now let's turn to C and C prime. In C, we read that the Son is the one through whom God made the worlds. Now, this shifts our attention away from his redemptive activity as incarnate to his pre-redemptive identity as unincarnate. It focuses not on the incarnate Son's role in redemption, but in the eternal Son's role in creation. And the sense, as you move from B to C, is that while Jesus is the heir of all things as the incarnate and resurrected Messiah, he is also the one through whom God made the worlds, plural. That is, the worlds in their successive eschatological movement toward the end of the age. So the identity of the Son extends beyond his incarnate identity. He's the one through whom God made the worlds. So as we look then at C, and we look at the progression of the chiasm, it's taking us deeper into the identity of the Son of God. And let's put it this way. The author of Hebrews has a critical point. Not only is the Son the omega inheritor of all things, B, he is the alpha creator of all things, C. All things are through the eternal Son. And so we can say that the incarnate Son inherits all things because the eternal Son has created all things, the worlds and all that has been made through the Son. And if you think about the teaching here in light of the developing chiasm, we can say something along these lines. That the Son is the center of redemptive historical revelation, A. The Son is the one who inherits all things at the end of this age, B. And the Son is the one who originates all things as creator. So from one standpoint, we can say, if we think of the middle of redemptive history, the Son is the one who has spoken a final word and performed a consummate and final deed. If we think of the beginning of history, he is the alpha originator. If we think of the end of history, he is the omega consummator. Whether we think, in other words, these are the ABCs of Christology, whether we think of the beginning, the middle, or the end of history, the author is giving us a Son-centered philosophy of history. He is the one through whom the world was made at the beginning. He is the one in whom God has spoken and in whom God has acted to save in the middle of history. And he is the one who has come to inherit all things in terms of the end of history. But that moves us to consider 3C prime. 3C, which is C prime. He upholds all things by the word of his power. C prime accents the pre-existence of the Son with regard to the economy of providence. And do you see how C and C prime are mutually interpretive? The pre-incarnate, pre-existent Son is the one through whom the worlds were made. The pre-existent Son is the one who, by the word of his power, upholds all things. The language there is important. Tapanta, all things. That corresponds to the tapanta in C. All things were made through the Son. All things are sustained by the Son. It's a comprehensive cosmic comparison. The things that he made, he upholds. All things. And that predicate participle pharon, holding up, is with reference to all things. The Son of God upholds all of the things that he has created. And pharon doesn't simply mean sustenance, but a leading and guiding of the world to its appointed goal. Voss makes that point in his teaching of the Epistle to Hebrews, page 83. So that the eternal Son is represented as the author of providence in the broadest sense of the term, according to Voss. And this participle, pharon, in a manner analogous to the previous participle on, has a perennial sense to it. The world has always been upheld by the word of the Son's power. The pre-existent Son always has and always will uphold the world. And that language, word of his power, that phrase accents the utterly divine character of the Son's power expressed in his word. Not only sustaining, but guiding the sum total of the universe to its appointed end. F.F. Bruce notes that this is an instance of a Hebraic adjectival genitive, and he notes that, quote, the creative utterance that called the world into being, see Hebrews 11:3, is parallel to the utterance by which it is maintained in its being. That's his point. The parallel between 1:3 and 11:3 is therefore instructive and illuminating. In Hebrews 11:3, we read that the universe was formed by the Word. In Hebrews 1:3, we learn that it is upheld by the Word of the Son. The same creative power that brings the world into being maintains the world in its being and guides it to its appointed end. Now, we're in a position to come to the center of the chiasmus, D and D prime. The Son being the brightness of God's glory, ap algas mates doxes, and the exact representation of his nature, kai character hypostasios autou. Now, we have to appreciate something important about this central portion of the chiasm. C and C prime deal with the work of the Son in relation to creation and providence. B and B prime looks at the work of the Son in relation to inheritance and redemption. A and A prime looks to the work of the incarnate Son with regard to revelation and mediation. But D and D prime bring into view the pre-existence of the Son in his identity as God, not with reference to things outside of himself, but we now see the Son's relation to the deity of the Godhead. Note well, first, that this relative clause follows immediately after the timeless participle on. The Son being the radiance of God's glory. The Son being the exact impress of the divine nature. Now, as we move into this, what does it mean to say that the Son is the apalgasma, the radiance of the doxa of God? What do we make of that? Well, let me tell you what not to make of it. Apalgasma is not conceptually a shining forth into the world. It's not an economic term. Apalgasma, instead, is a reference to the intrinsic being of the Son as God. So it's not an external, outward revelation of the radiance of glory. It's an inward, essential possession of the divine glory. And that term apalgasma can have either an active sense of radiance or effulgence, or a passive sense, a bare reflection. Most commentators take the active sense, and I think that view is basically sound. Why? Because the active sense conveys appropriately the fullness of the deity in the form of glory present in the Son. The Son need not reflect the glory of another because he is the radiance of the glory of God. Now, why do I say that? Let me give you an argument. This is an explication, or at least an allusion, to Isaiah 42:8. Isaiah 42:8 proves axiomatic for the singularity and uniqueness of Yahweh's identity as the bearer of divine and uncreated and radiant glory. Isaiah 42:8, I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not give my doxu, my glory, to another, nor my praise to graven images. Now, this is expressive of the thoroughgoing prophetic monotheism. There is one living and true God. And this one living and true God will not give his glory to another, nor praise to graven images. God alone is to be worshiped as the bearer of uncreated glory. But what does the author of Hebrews tell us? The author of Hebrews tells us that the Son is apalgasma tes doxes. The Son is the inherent, radiant fullness of the singular and uncreated glory of Jehovah, of the Lord. And if he is the radiance of the divine glory, it is quite obvious that he is of the same substance as the Father and the Spirit. He is the bearer, the active, radiant expression of the divine glory that is singular to Jehovah. Now, what does that language of character, the impress of the hypostasios of God mean in 3b? I'm going to say more about the two together. I just want to do this preliminary thing. Well, the language there of character, impress, denotes an exact representation of something, lu and nida, and can also be used with reference to something impressed on a coin or stamp to demonstrate authenticity, Liddell and Scott. And what's in view here is a precise, essential reproduction in every respect of the divine nature. It is of the hypostasios, the substance of God, that the Son, as a person, is a precise expression. Hypostasios denotes the objective essence of a thing or the nature of an object. And what comes into view here is that the Son is the personal impress of the divine substance. He not only is the radiance of the glory of God, he is the personal impress of the hypostasios of God, of the substance of God. And so, how do we relate apaugasma and character? How are they related to one another? What does it mean? Listen, what does it mean theologically to say that the Son is the apaugasma tes doxes, the radiance of the divine glory, and the character of the hypostasios of God? Well, Gerhardus Voss, in his teaching of the Epistle to Hebrews, has some insightful reflection on both of these terms. He says that we can either take these terms theologically or economically, either cosmically or theologically. And I'm just going to tell you, I'll give you the basic difference. If we took them cosmologically, we would be thinking of apaugasma and hypostasios economically. We would be thinking of it in revealed categories toward the world. If we take the two terms theologically, we would take them with reference to the being of God. It would be telling us of the Son's relation to the divine being. A cosmic reading would tell us about the Son's relation to the world. An ontological reading would be telling us about the Son's relation to deity. And Voss says there is no meaningful debate here that both the effulgence of the glory and the impress of the nature are to be taken theologically. They have reference to God's relation, the Son's relation to God himself. Now, what are the reasons for that? Why do we take the brightness of glory and the exact impress of the nature to describe the Son's relation to deity? Why do we take that? Well, Voss argues that there are 4 reasons, and I'll add a 5th here in a second. First, Voss says that the author prefaces 3a and 3b with the participle of being, not doing. On the other side of the chiasms, you have a reference to what the Son has done in creation. You have a reference to what the Son does in providence. You have a reference to what the Son does in B prime to purification for sins and sitting at the right hand of God. You have verbs that refer to as inheriting tapanta all things. And you have revelation in history and mediation in history in A and A prime. But Voss says in 3a and 3b, that is introduced with the timeless participle on, being, not doing. Secondly, he says the world is not mentioned either in 3a or 3b. In all the other portions of the chiasm, the world in some way, and the work of the Son of God with reference to the world in some way is brought into view. In A, it's his revelation in redemptive history. In A prime, it's his inheritance of a name better than the angels. In B, it's his inheriting all things in ascension. In B prime, it's his accomplishing redemption in his 2 estates. In C, it's his creating all things. In C prime, it's his sustaining all things. But in 3a and 3b, there is no reference to the world, but only to God. It's a category that pertains to what is true ad intra in the Godhead, not ad extra outside of the Godhead. And then third, Voss says, if you call the Son the character of the divine substance and treat it cosmically, it would imply a communicating of the divine substance to the world, which would be pantheism. Do you see what he's saying? If the Son is character and hypostasios ad extra, and you think of that cosmically, you're going to be moving toward the deifying of the world. An error akin to something that you might find in forms of Roman Catholicism or other errors. Fourth, Voss says, even if we accept the cosmological interpretation, we still cannot get rid of the theological background. The theological idea is a necessary implication in the background, even if we accept a cosmological or cosmical interpretation. I'm going to add a fifth. The chiasm proves Voss's point. That's my addition. You move from, as we've seen, from revelation in history to redemption in history to creation and providence in history to that which precedes history, to that which is not historical. You move into the eternal glory of the divine nature of the Son of God in 3a and 3b, in D and in D prime. So how do we relate these? Well, listen, this is some of the most insightful things I've ever read from Voss. But Voss says if we take this, 3a and 3b, in a theological Trinitarian sense, then the first phrase expresses the essential unity of the Godhead by reason of the identity of the Father and the Son, and by implication the Holy Spirit. We cannot think of the Son without thinking of the Father. Why? Because the Son is the fullness of the divine glory. But secondly, he says the second phrase indicates the likeness of the Son to the Father. In theological language, then, the expression, the effulgence of his glory assures us of the Son being homoousios with the Father, and the expression, the very image or impress of his substance, assures us of the Son being monogenes of the Father. That is, the only begotten Son of the Father. Homoousios speaks to the unity of the divine nature. Monogenes speaks to the distinction of the divine persons within the Godhead. And Voss says those terms yield orthodox Trinitarian theology. The Son is the fullness of the divine glory as a distinct Trinitarian person. Now, how do we understand this in relation to, for instance, Old Covenant prophets? Well, let me just remind you of this. I could do this with each of these parallel units, but think of it this way. How does D, the glory, eternal glory of the Son, relate to A, the Son as the one greater than the prophets? Why use this language that the Son is the radiance of God's glory in 3a? Well, if we think of it, the author of Hebrews is doing something subtle and significant when he speaks of the Son in his eternal identity as the brightness of God's glory in 3a. It's no accident that in describing the supremacy of Christ in his eternal ontological identity, our inspired author treats him as the brightness of the glory of God. Why? Well, in the Old Covenant, Moses is described as the prophet par excellence of the Old Covenant as he bears the divine glory. You remember in Exodus 34:6, the Lord condescended to Moses on Mount Sinai, passed before him and declared his name. The Lord passed before him and said, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. After Moses stood in the glory presence of God and received the divine revelation, what happened to his face as he descended the mountain in Exodus 34:29? Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tables of the testimony in his hand. And as he came down from the mountain, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone, because he had been talking with God. His face was so bright that people hid from him in fear, and he covered it to hide the fading glory. Moses was identified as a prophet by the luminous and glorious character of his countenance. Having been taken up into the heavenly council, his appearance was transformed into a dazzling display of light. And the point that the author of Hebrews is making is that prior to and apart from Moses' face being transformed, prior to and apart from the economic manifestation of this glory, the Son, not in his official capacity, but in his eternal being, is the unadulterated, uncompromised, absolute fullness of the radiance of the divine glory. And that is why he speaks a climactic word. The eternal Son, the radiance of the divine glory, the exact impress of the being of God, that Son is the subject of the incarnation. That Son is the one who spoke in and through his assumed and personalized humanity. That Son is the one who surpasses Moses, who surpasses Elijah. When they stood and spoke with him on the Mount of Transfiguration, and the light enveloped them and then departed, Moses disappeared, Elijah disappeared, and in Matthew 17:5, the voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." You see, the point is so clear. What invests the Son's mediatorial role as a prophet with ultimate and climactic authority is his divine person. Now that we've come to the heart of the chiasm, what do we see? We see that the eternal glory of the Son of God underwrites his glory as the incarnate Redeemer and sets on display the eternal dignity of his person. But I want to do one more thing. I want to take one more text and develop it just a bit. As we reflect on the chiastic structure here, it becomes plain from D and D prime that the eternal being of the Son of God is expressed in all of his works. Creation and providence, C and C prime. Suffering and glory, B and B prime. Revelation and mediation, A and A prime. What the Son reveals is greater than the prophets, and the covenant he mediates is greater than the angels, and the name he has inherited surpasses them all. Why? He is the eternal and immutable Son of God incarnate. The surpassing character of his revelation in these last days rests ultimately in the dignity and eternity of his person clothed in flesh. He surpasses Moses and Elijah as the Creator surpasses the creature and the Redeemer surpasses the redeemed. The eternal perfection of his person invests his work of mediation with an authority and an efficacy that vastly supersedes the angels. The climactic fullness of his inheriting all things and making purification for sin and sitting in heaven, B and B prime. Those presuppose and express the dignity of his person. David did not inherit all things as a type of the Lord's anointed, neither did Solomon nor any other fallen creature. Aaron was never allowed to sit in the most holy place, much less ascend to the heavenly original. Why? Because none were divine persons incarnate. But the Son of God inherits all things. The Son of God makes purification for all sin for his people. And the Son of God sits at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. And he does so as the eternal Son of God incarnate, crucified, and ascended. The work of creation and the acts of providence are the transitive acts of the unfleshed, pre-existent Son of God apart from his incarnation. It is this person who redeems. It is this person who reveals. He is the creator and sustainer of all things. D and D prime account for all these facts. Now this leads me to a final point I'd like to make regarding the person of the Son in his works of creation and in his work as high priest. So I'm coming back to hit the outer portions of the chiasm, C and C prime, B and B prime, A and A prime. But I'm doing it with reference to the person. The author of Hebrews in Hebrews 1, 10 through 12, ascribes to the eternal Son of God in the words of Psalm 102, 26 through 27 as follows. And you, O Lord, laid the foundation of earth in the beginning, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. Like a robe, you will roll them up. Like a garment, they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will have no end. These verses teach that the Son of God does not change in his work of creation. He remains the immutable and living Son of God in his transitive work of creation. Verses 10 through 12 reflect on Genesis 1:1 and the creation ex nihilo in the absolute beginning. The eternal Son created the changing heavens and the changing earth in the absolute beginning. But the text makes a categorical distinction between the hypostasis of the Son and the sum total of all that he created. Whether the invisible heaven or the visible earth. 11a, they will perish, but you remain. 11b through 12, they will be changed, but you are the same, and your years have no end. The contrast here hinges on the person of the Son as creator. He remains the same and his years have no end, and the created order that changes and perishes. The person of the Son remains the same. This is language of personal immutability. The person of the Son will have no end. That is his personal eternity. But the created, in the sharpest contrast, is subject to change and perishability. They will be changed, but the Lord remains the same, immutable, and his years have no end, eternal. William Gouge, a member of the Westminster Assembly, in his commentary on Hebrews, notes, quote, that the work of your hands, end quote, is an anthropomorphism that utilizes categories from the created order to express the agency of the most absolute, immutable creator without parts or passions. He summarizes the teaching of that verse regarding the immutable person of the Son as creator as follows. 1. The first, thou remainest, pointeth at Christ's eternity before all times, for it implieth his being before, in which he still abides. The second, thou art the same, declares Christ's constancy. There is no variableness with him. Thus, therefore, he saith of himself, I am the Lord, I change not. Notice he's saying this of the person of Christ. The third, thy years shall not fail, intendeth Christ's everlastingness, that he who was before all times and continues in all ages will beyond all time continue. He continues by saying that the person of the Son is immutable in his essence and being, his counsel, his attributes, his word, and his bonds, whereby he binds himself to us in unalterable promises and oaths. End of quote. Just as the Father of heavenly lights does not change like shifting shadows, as he gives every good and perfect gift, so also the Son of God does not change as the one who in the beginning created the heavens and the earth. They will perish. They will be rolled up like a scroll. But about the Son, he will not change. His years will know no end. By stating this, then, we're avoiding all forms of dipolar theism. The doctrine that God is immutable in himself, but mutable as creator. Or the doctrine that persons in the Godhead change in their transitive acts. Dipolar theism, in some formulations, can mean that God is immutable until he decides not to be. But the author of Hebrews destroys any kind of dialectical or dipolar construction. Biblical teaching, creedal and confessional orthodoxy maintain this, that the person of the Son does not change in his transitive work of creation. The same is true of the person of the mediator. Hebrews 13:8 teaches Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Regarding this text, Gerhardus Voss, in his sermon, The Eternal Christ, is just wonderful. In it, he comments in the fourth heading of the sermon on, quote, the immutability of the Son of God. And he says that the recipients, quote, would understand that Jesus Christ must indeed be the same yesterday, today, and forever, because they remembered who Jesus Christ was and what terms he had described to them in almost every sentence of the epistle. He was the Son of God, the effulgence of the Father's glory, the very image of his substance, Hebrews 1:3. To him the author had applied the words of the 102nd Psalm, Thou, Lord, in the beginning hast laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of thy hands. They shall perish, but thou remainest. They shall wax old as cloth, as a garment, and as a mantle you will roll them up, but thou art the same, and thy years shall not fail. Voss says this then, to him therefore belongs the attribute of unchangeableness that is inherent in the conception of divinity itself. End quote. Notice what Voss is saying. Notice the connection he makes explicit between Hebrews 1:3, Hebrews 1:10 through 12, and Hebrews 13:8. The attribute of unchangeableness that inheres in the conception of divinity belongs to the person of the Son. His person is immutable in the divine processions. His person is immutable in the work of creation. His person is immutable in the hypostatic union. Hebrews 1:3, Hebrews 1:10 through 12, Hebrews 13:8. Immutability, listen, is inalienable and ineradicable to his person in all of his works and in all of his relations. And Voss continues, if you take that away, if you deny the immutability of his person, listen to what happens. Please hear this. This is a religious point. If you take this away, you take away the foundation that is taught concerning, you take away the foundation of everything that is taught concerning Christ as the Savior, not merely because it would be impossible for us to approach him in a religious spirit were he divested of those attributes, but even more so because it would be impossible for him to approach us and encompass us and enlighten us and atone for us and bring us back to God if he be not rooted with his personal life in the soil of divinity and eternity. Beautiful sermonic way of putting it. There is not a writing in the New Testament which teaches us so emphatically the absolute indispensableness of the divine nature of Christ for the work of redemption as the epistle to the Hebrews does. He is the climax of all prophecy because he is the Son who does not speak the truth for a small portion or in a limited manner as it came to the fathers through the prophets, but who speaks it as the echo of the voice of God himself, and therefore speaks it to all the ages, so that we may say of himself not only, but of his speech, it is the same yesterday and today and forever, the same in authenticity, the same in freshness, the same in vital power as when it first resounded from the background of eternity. That's true religion. Putting Voss in this way, or putting it as Voss does, helps us grasp the immutability of the person of Jesus Christ in terms of the religious confidence and hope that inheres in the new covenant he mediates. If you were to deny the personal immutability of Jesus as incarnate, two things would be impossible. One, it would be impossible for him to save us and bring us to God by his cross and ascension. Why? Because salvation is of the Lord. Salvation is of God. Secondly, it would be impossible for us to approach him with the religious spirit. He would just be a creature. There would be no worship. There would be no creator-creature relation mediated in his person. You see, this is not just a doctrinal issue. This is about true religion. This is about the essence of Christian religion. True religion depends on the person of Jesus Christ as incarnate mediator being rooted with his personal life, his person, in the soil of divinity and eternity. The personal immutability of our incarnate mediator is indispensable for true religion. Nothing other than an immutable divine person clothed in our humanity could save us by his suffering and glory. Nothing other than an immutable divine person can ground our religious approach and confer on us unshakable confidence and certain hope in our salvation. If his person does not change, you can trust his word. If his person does not change, you can rely on his promises. If his person does not change, you can trust in the words of William Gouge, quote, his bonds whereby he binds himself to us in unalterable promises and oaths. But if his person changes, all of this is lost. It would hold no religious value. And it would contradict the entire point of the book of Hebrews as we've seen it. We can draw close to Jesus, trust his word, rest on his promises, because he is a divine person whose steadfastness and constancy grounds our religious hope. And in his glorified humanity, he ever lives to save us to the uttermost and bring us to glory and rest in God. I'll conclude this section with a devotional summary from Gerhardus Voss. Finally, his eternity and priesthood are seen most clearly united in this, that for the main part, the discharge of his priestly functions takes place, according to our epistle, in heaven, where he ministers in his glorified state. The two are so inseparable that the author simply says if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all. But being in heaven, he is the one priest, and his priestly state partakes of the unchangeability which is the supreme law of that world. He is a priest upon his throne, to use an Old Testament phrase, and his throne, as we have seen, is everlasting, since it stands at the right hand of the throne of God himself. Even when the priestly work in the specific sense of application of his redemption shall have ceased, when it no longer will be necessary for him to make intercession or plead his merit for us, because all sin and all consequences of sin shall be removed, even then he will remain the everlasting high priest, offering up to God the united adoration and praise of the redeemed race of which he is the head. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Amen.
Thank you for watching this lesson from Reformed Academy. This is just the beginning. At Reformed Academy, we offer free, in-depth courses that will help you grow in your knowledge of God's Word. Join thousands of learners from around the world who are deepening their faith and engaging with rich, redemptive historical theology, all at no cost to you. Sign up today at reformedforum.org/academy and start exploring the unfolding message of Christ revealed in all the Scriptures.